Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the channel. I'm here with a lovely new friend, colleague, Jordin James, and we met doing a Enneagram summit talking about our heart types. And it was so intimate. It was actually very healing for me to talk to so many people who are just open and understanding of the systems, because usually when we talk about archetype systems or typologies, I get surface level conversations, but even he talked about it to the facilitator. He was like, this is so thorough and more in depth and like vulnerable because everyone here is in a space of healing and helping themselves. And so it was pretty awesome to tap into that. And so it was doubly rewarding. And I'm so glad that you're here. Would you like to share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, I would. First of all, hi everybody. Thanks for having me. I am an Enneagram type 3, so I was in that heart type panel with Booney, and she's right. Like it was just like heart types, we can live our life so dramatically that it was really cool to be able to like speak to the depth and like the realness and the vulnerability of something that can be abstract sometimes, like the Enneagram and like inner world stuff. So yeah, that was right. It was like a couple of days after I was like, I gotta reach out to Booney because I really want to get to know her more. Yeah. So hello, I am Jordin James. I am a coach, a parts work coach. We're gonna get into parts work a little bit today. Good stuff. I help primarily survivors of narcissistic abuse.
Mm.
I help them feel happy and actually safe in relationships again. Narcissistic abuse is part of my story. I'll get into it a little bit when I start talking. But it's part of my story, and I find like the complexities of narcissistic abuse and relational dynamics
Mm.
just aren't addressed in a lot of material out there. So it's absolutely my pleasure to help survivors of narcissistic abuse feel safe in relationships again, because it is so possible. It is so possible. There's so much hope. So that's kind of the front end of who I coach. The back end, like the back door of my business, is I help highly gifted people that are going through a dark night of the soul,
Love it.
because
Yeah.
it can be really, really challenging to find somebody that can match your depth when you are highly gifted, that can guide you through something intimate like that. And so that's my pleasure to do for folks too.
Mm. I think you just named out so many wonderful keywords. I'm sure people's ears and antenna are like, yes, this sounds good for me too. Let's go.
Yeah, let's go. Cool. Yeah. So, I have been, my intellectual parts have been synthesizing the Enneagram with parts work.
Mm.
And so that's what I would love to talk with you about and share today and get your thoughts on.
Oh yeah, I'm here for it. I saw a little bit about it. My intrigue is like through the roof. I'm really excited, and I just love how here. So one of my passions is hearing people's processing and cognition, and so like I just love hearing people explain something, even though I might understand it too. But learning how you explain it, the words that you choose, it's like a playground for me to know that. So it's fun too.
Yes, I feel the same way, because like how you hold the conversation about a thing tells me a lot about you, and
Yeah.
tells me a lot about like what you've had to go through to connect the dots that you do and use the language that you do.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I'm super excited to like hear the way that you talk about things too. Like I'd love this to be kind of dynamic. Yeah.
Okay. And I would like to learn now.
Yeah. Okay.
Give it
All
to
right.
me.
Let's get to learning. All right, let me share my screen. Um, share. All right. Can you all see this?
Yes.
Okay, let me get this set up. Okay. So, Enneagram and parts work for survivors of narcissistic abuse to reclaim their clarity and confidence. All right, this is going to be for much more than just survivors of narcissistic abuse. This is going to be for any and all of my inner world weirdos and nerds and geeks who love mapping out the abstract inner
Yeah.
world in a way that's like practical and helps you live more in a truer way. Okay.
Mm.
So, this is me.
Hey,
I
it's the
am a
same
narcissist.
top.
Yeah, I know. This is like my go-to top. This is like my power top.
Love it.
Some people are like, you should change your clothes. I'm like, no, I picked something
Nah.
that isn't broke. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm a narcissistic abuse survivor. I have just been in the trenches of that, and I am now that I've been on the other side of it, I've experienced healthy relationships. I've experienced secure attachment from like disorganized attachment.
Mm,
Now that I'm kind of on the outside looking in, it's it is absolutely fascinating what you learn in those narcissistic codependent dynamics about yourself and the inner world. I am an ex-engineer. My background's actually in civil engineering, believe it or not, turned coach for survivors of narcissistic abuse. And so what I really do is I help survivors re-engineer their inner world using the Enneagram and parts work to
mm,
feel more love and safety and inner power, which is basically just confidence and clarity.
mm.
So yeah, I use the Enneagram and parts work as pillars for like root cause healing, not just kind of like surface structures that are meant to like cover up pain.
I
Like we're
yeah,
diving all the way in, yeah.
love it. And I also like that you used engineer twice. That's so clever and cute. Like I'm an engineer and I re-engineer.
Thank you. That's actually new that came to me the other day and I was like, "Oh my God, of course that's what I do." It's one of those things that's like so close in, it's you can't see it until like
Mm,
you see it. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into parts work 101. So some of y'all
ye-
might have already heard about parts work or internal family systems. I have an interesting way of talking about it. So even if you have already learned stuff, even if you already know stuff, there might be some like little new nuggets or little new like dots connected. So,
Great.
but for those of you who haven't heard of it, no worries. Like, well, let's just go right from the beginning. So, it is a common misconception that your inner world should be made up of just one solitary, like you, that there should only be one voice in your head, only one feeling you're feeling, only one thought you're thinking. This is actually very patriarchal. There has been so many, if, I think it's the book Many Minds One Self. It goes back through the history of psychology and how over and over again, this very patriarchal, like there should be no discrepancies inside of you. Everything needs to be the same. Everything needs to be linear, like just kept squashing any other ideologies about what our inner world should be like. So now we're left with this I don't know, chronic pathologization
Mm,
of, I don't know if that's a word, but you get what I'm saying,
yes.
of anything that's other than just like one unitary sense of self. Okay, so what is true is that this is actually not the case. This is not how the inner world works. In reality, there is a whole bunch of different parts of us. There's a whole bunch of different parts of you that live in your inner world. And so all of those different parts have different roles and different responsibilities, but all of them are trying to get your needs met. Like this is just a part of being human. So like if we make this practical, how many times have you said something like, well, a part of me wants this, but another part of me wants something
Yes.
else? Like a part of me wants to go to the party, a part of me wants to stay home, right?
Yes.
Like
Yes.
that's super common. Or like, how about this one, especially as a fellow heart type? How many times have you felt multiple feelings at the same time?
Uh, every day.
Every day, like right now, that's what I'm feeling. And like, that's because there's two different parts of you feeling two different feelings, right? So like, parts work to me, this is how I describe it, is the work of getting to know the different parts of yourself and helping them learn to work together as a part of a team instead of warring against each other. Because trauma teaches our parts to war against each other. And like parts work helps them actually remember that we're all a team in here.
Oh my gosh, so you would say the warring part? That is just so
Hmm.
sad to use that word. It's like that is the ultimate feeling for people who are pained and kind of I say it's fragmented, right? So like
Hmm.
it's the dysregulation, it's fragmentation, it's just like it does for me when I feel like it's warring against yourself too, like I pair it heavily with like grief and depression. You know, you don't know if you can love
Hmm.
yourself, right? And so there's this like split whatever's happening inside. Oh.
Yeah, completely. I'm glad you brought up depression too, because like the way that I have experienced my own depression, the part of me that like makes me depressed is usually because actually underneath the depression, there are two different parts that are going to war with each other. And that war is getting so intense that this depression part's like, I know how to shut this down. Like I'm just going to put a blanket over everything and we're just going to feel depressed. That way we're gonna quiet the war.
That's great.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I've actually been able to see my depression as like, oh, this is a valid part of me.
Mm.
Like this is a valid response to like the pain that's inside of me. Yeah. So anyway, a little tidbit about depression. Um, I just want to give one other example of parts work. So this is like a little bit more surfacey.
I do cake stuff too.
Do you? Okay, perfect. Yeah. So like when I see a piece of cake, immediately I've got a part of me that's like, I want to eat that.
Mm.
Like, give me a piece, give me a slice. And soon after, this isn't as much anymore, but it still sometimes pops up. Soon after, there's a part that's like, no, no, like you shouldn't eat that cake for like so many different reasons, whatever. But like just one piece of cake starts a conversation in my head between my parts. And like this happens so unconsciously and like so naturally that when we really pay attention to it, it's like, oh, of course we have different parts of us.
Mhm.
Of course. Like my thoughts are just my parts having a conversation.
Mhm.
Yeah. So this is why parts work. I absolutely love it, especially for survivors of narcissistic abuse or survivors of trauma, is that trauma teaches our parts to treat each other like this.
Mm.
And so the voices in our head get so loud, they're fighting against each other. They're terrified of what would happen if they stopped playing these extreme roles because the other part that's playing the opposite extreme role is going to take over. And so it's just that it can get really intense, a jumbled up mess. But in my experience and in the experience of my clients after parts work, it's like the difference between the voices in your head being a bunch of screaming like 10-year-olds versus a group of capable adults like working together toward the same goal with love, that love your inner child instead of blame her for all your problems.
Mm.
It's just a much different way of experiencing life. And I have been surprised at how much parts work has actually helped me do that, because the difference that parts work it makes for me is it actually puts you in a dialogue with yourself instead of a monologue.
Mm-mm.
And like what gets ruptured in relationships, like what gets traumatized in relationships gets healed in relationships. And so like why parts work has been so powerful is it puts you back into relationship with yourself so you can actually heal those relational wounds. So that's just an overview of parts work. If we dive in just a tiny bit deeper, because this is the part that I'm going to synthesize with the Enneagram. So this is the part that's going to get like kind of intellectual, but also pretty juicy. So internal family systems is one lens of viewing parts. So here's what I want to say about internal family systems and parts work. Like parts work is like the overall umbrella of viewing ourselves as our inner world as like multiplicity. So like there's so many different ways that we can categorize that multiplicity.
Mm.
There's an infinite amount of ways. And so the internal family systems way of categorization is just one of them. It's just one way to categorize the parts. But it is super interesting to synthesize with the Enneagram. So according to internal family systems, there's three kind of categories of parts. There is our manager parts, our firefighter parts, and our vulnerable parts. I call them vulnerable parts. Internal family systems calls them exiles. We'll get into why in a second. So these are kind of like the three main categories of parts. And here is a very extremely oversimplified map of how these parts tend to organize themselves in our inner worlds. So you can think of your vulnerable parts as being in the very, very center at your deepest core. They are the ones that are holding your core beliefs and wounds. And then your firefighter parts are the kind of the last line of defense, protecting these painful beliefs from like getting out and from
Mm.
getting like out of control. And then you've got your manager parts here, and they're kind of looking outward on the periphery, trying to do their absolute best to keep both your vulnerable parts and your firefighter parts at bay, while they're like trying to navigate the outer world, making sure that nothing bad is gonna like happen in the future.
Mm-hmm.
So manager parts are usually the first to admit how absolutely exhausted they are because they are playing a big role trying to hold it all together. And so let's dive in just a tiny bit to more of these parts so you can get a feel for them. So for vulnerable parts, these are the parts of you that are carrying the burdens of like the raw emotional pain and extreme beliefs that you encountered either in your trauma or during childhood. Like nobody makes it out of childhood unscathed, especially in the society that we live in today. These are the parts that hold the like raw emotional experience. They may feel overwhelmed, alone, or isolated. It's another way to think about your inner child. So in terms of like, now that I know what I know about parts, it's like, oh yeah, I have multiple inner children.
Mm-hmm.
I have an infinite amount of inner children, actually. There's lots of different vulnerable parts that need love in here. And they're often exiled from our conscious awareness. So this is why internal family systems calls these kind of parts exiles, because they're exiled so far down that we are rarely conscious of them, even. Their pain runs so deep.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just a little bit more on vulnerable parts. Let's flesh out the firefighters. So firefighters are the parts of us that are protecting us from overwhelming emotions. So like the raw pain of the vulnerable parts is like stuffed in a box deep down in our unconscious. The firefighters are keeping an eye on that. Like if that box starts to smoke, if it's starting to like catch on fire, like the firefighters are gonna make sure they put that fire out. And like just like actual firefighters, they don't usually care what they harm in the process. Like actual firefighters in the world, if your house is on fire, they're not going to worry about messing up your lawn,
Yeah, yeah.
right? Yeah. And so they are the last line of defense. They come out in times of emergency and they can be really impulsive and extreme because like it is their role to make sure that the raw pain doesn't get exposed. So like examples of firefighter parts might be substance abuse parts, aggressive or rageful parts, dissociation parts, like depression is actually a firefighter part of mine. Depression will come in and just like put a blanket over something,
Mm-hmm.
just like, we're actually going to feel sad, really, really sad instead of like really lonely or anxious or feel like the core weight of our abandonment wounds. So that's firefighters. And then managers, sweet, sweet managers. So managers are focused on future pain prevention. Their motto is never again. So like never again will that bad thing happen to me. Never again will I be criticized for this. Like never again will I forget this. So managers are oriented toward kind of perfectionism, using perfectionism usually in its many different forms as a means for trying to ensure future safety.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, they're looking into the future for potential threats. The managers are the parts of us that are always looking out the window of the worst case scenario. And they're trying, but like they're not doing that because they're bad parts of us. They really are trying to keep us safe from anything that might trigger the deep down vulnerable parts, which then that's going to trigger the firefighter parts. And then the
Mm-hmm.
managers are going to have to come in and clean up the mess the firefighter parts left over.
Right. And that
Mm.
all makes sense because a child can't handle that stuff. You're just a child inside, right?
Yeah, yeah. Will you say a little bit more about that? Because I feel like that's really important.
So like, the exile or the inner child,
Mhm.
the mindset and the, I guess, congruence with time is not present oriented, right? You're stuck in the past. You have a childlike version of yourself inside. The woundedness is so fresh and strong. And so like there's a gap in reality with being able to actually conceptualize or see what's going on in the moment, right? And so you're overwhelmed, you can't be burdened to do this stuff because you're a child. How could you possibly take care of this stuff, And so the adults,
Mhm.
the adults that we have, the protectors and the firefighters, kind of adults. We're trying to do what we can to protect the child, but the child just like never know what it's like it's caught in a bubble, like like those children who are very sick and just have bubble worlds can't do much to they don't know what's going on outside because they're
Mhm.
constantly stuck in that survival mode. So I will
Mm-hmm.
rely on everyone else to protect, but my mind is not being updated. So it's like a data thing for the computer. You're not updating the memory, and so like it's constant fighting all the time because everyone is stuck in the past. Everyone's like relaying the mind is like the child telling everyone it's still unsafe. It's still this. Do this for me, and so like it's perpetuating again and again.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. God, I love listening to the language that you use about that. Yeah. And like what's ironic is as you get to know some of these managers and firefighters, they're very often teenagers
Mm-hmm.
or like 10-year-olds. So our parts get stuck at the age in which they were traumatized. And so like when you kind of like my perfectionist part, it's like, "Oh, sweetie, like you're a 12-year-old. Like you were never actually meant to play
Right.
this big of a role. Like is always too big for you."
Mm.
And like when I put it in the perspective of like, "Oh, this perfectionist part is 12." Like it kind of is, it allows that part to remember, oh yeah, I'm the child. And so I can actually be the parent to that part of me that was parentified. Mhm.
Love that.
So that's a little overview of the parts. I'll just give you a practical example of what this might look like in an actual like coaching session. So let's say a client comes to me feeling anxious about an upcoming date. Like that's a manager part. That's like looking out into the future, feeling anxious, thinking about all the things that could go wrong, all the things they need to prepare in order, to be enough or not too much. And so like that's how we usually present with our manager parts. And the reason why that manager part is so anxious, one of them is because that manager part is afraid that her depression is going to absolutely tank her after the date if it doesn't go well. And so that depression is an example of a firefighter part.
Mm.
And the reason that firefighter part comes in, we realize, is because that firefighter part, the depression, is protecting her from the raw feelings of extreme loneliness and abandonment that her deep down vulnerable parts are
Mm.
carrying. And so like there's so many different ways to approach this, but like one of the most, I don't know if this is the right word for it, but like efficient, one of the most straightforward ways to approach this, if there's enough capacity in the system, is to bring her own love right to the vulnerable part, to bring her own love to her raw loneliness and abandonment. And so that part can have a felt experience of love being there in
Mm.
a way that it wasn't actually back then. And that allows that vulnerable part to no longer be stuck in the past, but have a reference for presence because they're experiencing something new now.
How
Mhm.
how do you explain this part to someone? Like, does it take a couple sessions for them to understand how to do this, or do you kind of like use imagery or walk them through that part to do the own love part?
Yeah, so it usually happens really naturally. Like I'm kind of explaining this intellectually of like
Okay.
how we would work down, but actually it happens very conversationally in sessions. So I would have a conversation with our manager part and be like, oh, okay, yeah, what's the manager part afraid would happen if it didn't play this role?
Mm.
Well, the manager part would tell me, well, I'm afraid that I'm going to be really depressed. And so like, okay, let's talk to the part that's depressed. What would the depression be afraid would happen if it didn't play that role? Well,
Mm.
because like then she would feel so lonely in the abandonment wounds. Okay, well, one way that we could do this is go right to that part that feels so lonely and abandoned, and we can bring your love to her. So it happens very like
Mm. Mm. Mm.
conversationally and naturally. Yeah, and sometimes it's over the course of several sessions. Sometimes the healing, the core healing is already ready to happen. So it
Nice.
just really depends. Yeah. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so then when that vulnerable part gets a felt experience that they are loved, then the whole system can relax a little bit more because the date becomes much lower stakes because
Mm.
the date isn't responsible for containing the feelings of her vulnerable part. Like she's got
Yes.
that covered. So the date gets to be something separate.
Love it. Yes.
Hmm. Yeah. So that's just kind of a feel for parts work. Now I'd love to get into the Enneagram a little bit, and then synthesize the two together. So the Enneagram, I'm guessing y'all already know, you're already familiar with the Enneagram. I explain it in a different way than I've heard a lot of people explain it. Um, but there's also a lot of similarities. So the Enneagram is, for those of you who haven't heard about it, It's a personality tool. It is a way of mapping the inner world. And it's been one of the most helpful in my life. So parts work and the Enneagram have been the two most like actually practically helpful tools that I have uncovered. There are a lot of really smart people talking about the Enneagram. Some people have different takes on it, so there's so many different ways to speak about it. So I'll just speak about it in my own weird Jordin James language. So the way that I see the Enneagram is the 9 different flavors of survival mode that
Mm.
our parts can take on. And so the Enneagram, like, I don't see it as like, this is the type that you are, and like, this is the box that you're in. I see the Enneagram as a really dynamic map for where we've put ourselves in a box in order to try to survive,
Mhm.
and a map back to who we really are, outside of that box.
Yes, yes,
Yeah. Yeah. Can you resonate with that?
yes.
Yeah. So one of my favorite things about the Enneagram is the arrows, because it shows the relational, the fluid dynamics of how each type can mature into more freedom, more power, more flexibility.
Mhm.
Yeah. So let's synthesize the Enneagram and parts work. So like I said, like this is just one way to talk about the Enneagram, one way to talk about parts work, one way to synthesize the two. So I'm not saying that this is the end all be all, but I have found something extremely fascinating that I'm really excited to
What you're
share.
trying to say is, but I'm right.
Yeah, yeah. I'm saying this can be a really valuable way of synthesizing both the Enneagram and parts work that makes a lot of sense. So here's how I describe it. So your Enneagram type, your main Enneagram type, whether you're a 1 or a 6 or a 4 or a 9 or a 5, describes your manager parts. So it describes the parts of you that are most on the periphery of your awareness, the parts of you that are trying to keep the other parts at bay, and the parts of you that are trying to navigate the other world.
Mm.
We're gonna, in a second, after I kind of give this framework, we're gonna go through each of the different types. And so you can get a feel for like what I actually mean by this, how this plays out for each type. So your Enneagram type describes your manager parts. The arrows of disintegration, there's a lot of different ways to name these arrows, by the way, but I'll just call them the arrow of disintegration, or the stress point, to your firefighter parts.
Mhm.
And then the arrows of integration point to the vulnerable parts of you that some of the deepest parts of you that have been rejected. And this is kind of along the lines of Beatrice Chestnut and how she talks about this as the child heart point, or you might have also heard about, soul children from the Enneagram as well. It kind of ties into that. So let's dive into each type, and I'll kind of give a rundown of like how I think this looks. And then Booney, feel free to like chime in here or push back or anything as
Okay.
you go. Yeah. So managers for Enneagram type 1. So like if you're an Enneagram type 1, your manager parts are going to be on the lookout for what's wrong or out of place, what needs fixing, the right or perfect thing that you need to do, think, and feel in any situation. And the manager parts can become extremely rigid and even masochistic. Firefighter parts would look like the low side of type 4. So firefighter parts might escape into daydreams and fantasies. They can get moody and melancholy and withdrawn, or have really dramatic emotional outbursts, usually from pent-up resentment coming out. And then also they can be self-indulgent and like have some self-indulgent addictions.
Okay, when you describe 4 in that way, like I know it's like unhealthy version of 4, but I'm so insulted.
Yeah, I'm glad you are. Yeah, because it's a super low unhealthy side of 4. But when you think about firefighters are like the extreme, like I am putting out this fire at all costs. Like there's not a lot of self-awareness to firefighters.
There's all this like damage at the end that happens. You try to stomp out the fire, everything else starts catching on fire.
Exactly, exactly.
Like,
Like
oops.
that's the thing about both our managers and our firefighters, but like our protector parts always end up attracting the thing that they're trying to protect us against.
A constant paradox, yeah.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And so then for type ones, the vulnerable part that needs integration is their inner rejected type seven. You know, the part that just wants to play,
Mhm.
but was told that play wasn't okay. And so healing this part, integrating this part back into the system results in a really healthy balance between responsibility and relaxation for Enneagram ones.
Okay, so I'm getting excited because you're basically sharing there's 9 inner children versions in this system, right?
Yes.
So it's
Yeah.
exciting. That's I
Yeah.
love the different versions of, yeah, variations of an inner child, because you can have so many kinds, and then people are like,
Hmm.
when you talk about it and you describe it in one way, when you read about it or something, people might not resonate
Hmm.
exactly with it. Like, well, if you do it this way, there's a little more flavors, right? And so it's, I think people will be like,
Yes.
get it. It's like, yes, this is probably my version of an inner child. This makes more
Ye-
sense. Yeah.
yes, exactly. And this is why I love synthesizing it with the Enneagram because like, yeah, you can get more granular
Yeah, yeah.
about like your specific flavor.
Hmm.
Hell yeah. So type twos. Managers are on the lookout for who needs help, the needs that need to be met, and what they can do to help others. The managers usually have people-pleasing
Hmm.
tendencies. Firefighters can behave like the low side of type 8. So they can be really blunt and forceful, concerned about like basic survival needs and like pour themselves into work.
Hmm.
They can get controlling. They can get also aggressive and defensive. And then the vulnerable parts for type 2s that need integration is their rejected inner type 4, which is the part that was told that they aren't worthy of having their own needs and feelings, that their own experience isn't valuable. And healing this part, integrating it back into the system results in a healthy balance between focusing on themselves and focusing on others.
I love the way you're describing. So what's neat is, if you just use the Enneagram system on its own, you'll go through the lines, right? And have the description of each one. And then sometimes, depending on your emotional wellness at the moment, you'll go towards either the disintegration or integration, right? And so
Mhm.
when you describe it in this way, though, like at the core is this wounded, right? And so if you think about it
Mhm.
that way, when you're at a healthier state or unemotional or emotional state, you can be like, can I heal? Can I help my woundedness right now? Can I help my young child inside of me? Like, yes or no? Like, if not, I'm gonna go the other direction because the child can't handle it, right? So this is really cool to see it like this.
Completely. Yeah, completely. It starts to like put you in a different, like an actual conversation with yourself,
Hmm.
instead of just intellectualizing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Enneagram threes, this is my Enneagram. So managers are on the lookout for how people respond to them when they walk into a room. What are people's reactions?
Mhm.
It's man, the Enneagram just drags me. So managers are on the lookout for how to impress others, the most efficient path to success, and managers are usually hyper focused on achievement and image. Firefighters behave like the low side of 9. So depression, shutdown, dissociation, apathetic, complacent, going through the motions, can get just kind of in their head with fantasies and wishful thinking of success, but never actually taking any action on it, which then just makes the managers feel like even more of a failure. Um, so this is like the first time that or the first way that I started realizing or synthesizing the Enneagram in parts, because I would notice I was oscillating between hyper achievement and then like super depression.
Hmm.
And so I was like, oh, these are my 9 parts coming in. So
Yeah.
like I have 3 parts and I have 9 parts. And so once they were able to finally be in conversation with one another, I was able to find a more balanced middle way that actually allowed me to heal the vulnerable part, or, that's an ongoing thing. But for type threes, the vulnerable part is the part that's legitimately scared, the part that's scared and without protection, that had to bury their fear and anxiety and just focus on doing
Mm,
in order to survive. And
right.
so reintegrating this part and reintegrating this like fear, this part that's so afraid, results in a healthy balance between moving forward and doing and like pausing for reflection.
Yeah. And again, just another way to say why these three ways of seeing is important. I think a lot of times in the beginning, if people are resistant or defensive, you describe their type, they're like, that's not me. Nope, nope, that's not me. And so if you kind of like go a roundabout way of just describe, okay, well, let's just explore some more. Let's go towards, the manager type, the firefighter, and then maybe with the vulnerable type, there's this underlying thing, right? Because if you go towards the Enneagram system and you go toward the core wounding of the manager type, the type that you get, it's a different
Mhm.
feeling. But if you describe the vulnerability of the child or the inner child type, like that's something that might click too. So it depends where someone's
Exactly.
at. It really does.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it can help distinguish between mistypes because like I have a really strong forewing,
Mhm.
but it was actually this system that helps me realize like, no, I'm a type 3 because my firefighters are 9s. My firefighters just
Uh,
shut me down.
that makes sense. Yeah.
Hmm. So 4s, so obviously please feel free to chime in on this.
Oh, I'm ready.
Managers for the 4s might be on the lookout for how they're different from others, the ways they're different, the ways they don't fit in, the ways they're special, or an evidence of what they feel like they're missing in themselves. And they are managers are constantly paying attention to the dynamics of their inner emotional states.
Hmm.
Is there anything else you would add, or what do you think about that?
So I think this is something that people who are maybe new to the system are just like, I got typed, I did something online, it's not me, blah, 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 blah. I hate the system, it doesn't work. So, like,
Hmm.
if you go through that and you actually look at it from this lens, I'm gonna kind of emphasize again the descriptions for the managers, the firefighters, and the vulnerable part is the unhealthy version of the type. Like, so you
Yes.
gotta think about it that way too. Like, this is not you all the time. This is when you're super stressed out. This is when you're going through grief, some major life event happened and you're in survival mode. At your best, you're not like this. So what you're looking at is what we tend to see when you need some support to grow. This is what it could look like. We're not saying this is you and like bad shame on you. Like if you feel that way, then that's information. So you kind of look into that too. But like I'm saying, this is not any type at their best. This is not.
Yes, I'm so glad you said that because like while IFS talks about these three different kinds of parts, there's also a whole other category of parts that aren't burdened.
Yes.
Parts that are in their naturally helpful roles. The manager, firefighters, and vulnerable parts are the parts that had to twist under trauma, that
Mhm.
had to adapt to more extreme roles
Yeah.
to survive. Yeah. Mhm. So the firefighters would behave like the low side of type 2. So that might look like forced friendliness.
Ugh.
Yeah.
Can you not do this to me right now?
Chronic worry about the state of relationships, people pleasing, and getting really jealous and possessive in
Sorry,
relationships.
laughing.
Yeah.
Show my boyfriend. Sorry.
I know the Enneagram drags me. And then the vulnerable parts that need integration is the rejected inner type 1, the part whose ideals for a better world were criticized instead of appreciated. So healing this part results in a healthy balance between like practical structure and creative gifts.
Hmm. I like that, in the beginning when you're going through your type exploration, it's important to feel the cringe. You got to laugh at it a little bit.
Mhm.
So like that's when you know for sure, okay, it could be my type.
Yep.
It's not all flowers and sunshine, and there's some things going on. It poked me a little bit, and I'm gonna go home and think about it some more.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's good. Mm.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, the Enneagram does not protect you from your shadow. It does not take it easy on you.
Mm-mm.
But it also is such a beautiful mirror for, your gifts too, which I guess is not incorporated in this presentation quite as much, but I'm glad that you're like making that aware.
You're gonna
You're
have to
making
do
them aware
another
of
one
that.
for me then.
Yeah. Yeah, sounds good.
You owe us.
Yeah. I would actually be happy to.
Okay.
All right. Type 5s. So Managers for type fives would be on the lookout for why things are the way they are. Just a constant curiosity, always searching, asking questions, delving into things in depth. Sometimes five manager parts can get hyper focused on one area of study, like one unique niche that they can kind of like build an identity around. And then managers for fives usually resist like traditional doctrines or ideas because they find it really important to find their own meaning with the raw data.
Oh. Can I kind of bounce off of that? Because I mentioned it
Please.
earlier. So my
Yeah.
wing, I have a very strong five wing, and I talked about
Hmm.
how I don't care about degrees and I don't care about accolades. If you don't know the stuff you're talking about and you're relying on your degree to get respect and get space into some type of a conversation or area of expertise, then you're doing it wrong. And I don't care. I don't respect that. And so it's for me, hierarchies don't matter. You put in the merit and you put in the work, and that's what matters to me. So
Yep. And I also say like degrees and certifications show that you're a good learner,
mhm.
not necessarily that you're a good practitioner.
Yes.
Like those are two different things.
Hmm.
Firefighters for type fives can look like the low side of seven. So like impulsively throwing themselves into activities, being really restless and agitated. Like sometimes, especially if they can't find a specific niche that they feel content to like dive into and make a home around, they can just be researching a bunch of different things, trying to find a home. They can, yeah, anxiously bounce around with ideas or activities, but never like find a place to settle. That could be what firefighters behave like. And then the vulnerable parts is their inner rejected type 8. So the part whose self-assertion in the world wasn't seen or supported. And so reintegrating this part and helping this part mature results in a healthy balance between withdrawing and moving out into the world.
Okay, so when you say I'm trying to picture a baby eight, like, so what
Mm-hmm.
would that look like? A baby eight who's like used to be like assertive and loud and take up space or say something defensive of like, I know what to do, and then some series of events or some major event happens where they shut down their voice or something. Is that what it would look like? Okay,
Yeah,
okay,
that's a great example of it. Yeah, exactly. Where they like moved out into the world and embodied themselves in the world, and it was either seen as incompetent or it was shut down.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's kind of like reintegrating their own self-assertion.
Okay.
Okay, type sixes. Managers are on the lookout for worst case scenarios, usually for type sixes. They are also on the lookout for the well-being of relationships and ideals that they are loyal to, that they care about. The managers are they can get very meta, and that the managers are trying to manage the managers that are anxious. So they're trying to manage their own anxiety. They're anxious about their own anxiety. And also like they're on the lookout of ways to construct social security through relationships.
Okay, so this is really interesting because I don't know why, but type 6 was the hardest for me to understand.
Hmm.
Because I used to think of twos as super codependent, and I would see certain type of external behavior. I wouldn't understand underlying stuff underneath. I'm like, that's a two, that's a two. I'm like, but there's something off. They're not exactly a two. And so once I learned more and
Hmm.
actually face to face with someone explaining to me the need for social security as a six, I'm like, everything just started clicking. I'm like, I can tell the difference now. It was so interesting that, but it looked like more of like the codependent types of traits. And so I would just like
Hmm.
blanket all the twos like that. And so I had my own bias of what I was seeing
Hmm.
because of my relationship
Hmm.
with two too. So like it was just interesting that, six, like sometimes, I don't know, I guess I have like certain blind spots for certain types, but six is still very interesting to me when I see six.
Hmm.
Because they like, I know there's some people who have like, I always talk about it in certain things when I mention six. Six has the stereotype of like the prepper, in a apocalyptic scenario, you'd want them on your side, right? Because they plan everything through. They're going to survive. So that's his strength. We're not talking about strengths right now, but like I love sixes. You guys will help us survive.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Because their managers are on the lookout of like in any sort of situation, what am I going to need to survive,
Hmm.
including, Social Security. Well, that's different than the Social Security system, but yeah, you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Yeah. Okay. Firefighters behave like the low side of type 3. So workaholic, anxiously trying to fit in, anxiously trying to be the best. They
Mm,
find their safety through impressing people and very image conscious. And so, man, like because I have some type 6 clients and I just have so much compassion for them because I can see me as a type 3. I can see their firefighters come out and just extreme 3. So like their
yes.
manager parts are extremely in their mind, anxiously going. And then they have these aggressive type 3s that are so oriented toward impressing and being the
Mm,
best and needing to find the most efficient path. Like
yes.
it's just a lot inside of there for a 6. It's a
Mm,
lot.
yes. Oh no, I know a
Yeah.
couple sixes. They're not integrated that well, but like the image consciousness is like people see it, but they won't even allow themselves to receive that praise
Mm-hmm.
sometimes too. But they're so good at it because that's the way they survive.
Yeah,
Yeah.
totally. Yeah, exactly. And so, which makes it like all of this busyness between the managers and the firefighters can make it really hard to actually get in touch with the vulnerable part that needs integration, which is the chillest type, the rejected inner type 9,
Mm,
right? So, and usually that's the part who didn't have enough adult support that they could trust growing up. So the part that was it didn't feel safe to just be in their body, to just exist, to just be
yeah.
present because
Yeah.
there wasn't enough support holding a container for them. So getting in touch with that inner type 9 results in a healthy balance between, watching out for danger and keeping an eye on like legitimate danger.
Hmm.
And then also just being able to relax in
Yes.
the world, especially in relationships. Mhm. All right, type 7s. So managers for type 7s are on the lookout for fun things to do, reasons to be optimistic. They're on the lookout for the next thing they have to look forward to. They are very often quick and agile, like they're always staying busy. And then the manager parts are managing their anxiety through always being on the go. So
Hmm.
they're always looking for like the next thing, the next thing, the next thing, because they're afraid of, the vulnerable parts and the firefighters that's going to come up when they stop.
Hmm.
Mhm. But this is why, like with positive thinking and stuff, I think there's a lot of 7s out there that are just so like, I don't get it. You just like think positive. Like you just look for the
Yeah.
next good thing.
Let's
It's
just
like, well,
keep
because like
going.
that's actually your survival mode. Like that's actually like your managers.
I made this one video once for sevens about how sevens can learn from fours to just relax and feel their feelings and do nothing. A seven commented like, "You told me nothing." I'm like, "What the heck? I told you how to feel your feelings because you're always doing stuff."
Yeah, totally. I have dated a lot of 7s and I've learned a lot from them. And also, yeah, if you're a 7, like maybe take a second to feel your feelings every once in a while.
Yeah.
Okay, firefighters can look like the low side of type 1. So just like forcing really rigid boundaries on themselves. Like, all right, now I'm gonna like be disciplined. Because their managers are so, kind of like out there for the next thing that these firefighters like try to contain them.
Mm.
The firefighters can get extremely critical and nitpicking about things. Like kind of the opposite of the managers. Like the firefighters are always looking for what's wrong, what's broken, things to criticize, right? And so those firefighters can also be really angry and resentful.
Mm.
Hmm. So the vulnerable part that 7s have the invitation to integrate is their rejected inner type 5. So the part of them that did not have a safe place to retreat to in order to actually regulate their fear and anxiety. And so they had to just like keep going and keep looking for, something else.
Oh.
So yeah, what do you think about that?
I'm trying to differentiate between a person right now who I don't know if they're a
Hmm.
seven or a five. This is
Hmm.
I'll have to like review this to see which one's which because it's so like the trauma is just blanketing everything. And
Yeah,
so
I
I
get
can't
that.
really tell right now. Like which one is the
Hmm.
inner child? Which one are they constantly in trauma mode? That's why I see this? Or like is it because they're using their manager? Like I can't tell, you know?
Uh-huh, totally. Yeah. Yep. So relatable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, but I've found this has helped with like those kind of questions to be like, oh, yeah, this is the one more in a firefighter role than a manager role, you
Mm-mm.
know? So
Yep.
anyway, um, so healing for like bringing this inner type 5 back into the system results in a healthy balance for sevens between like stimulation of social world, of the world at large, and then their own need to rest and withdraw and just be present.
Mm.
All right, eights. So for type eights, managers are on the lookout for challenges to overcome, people who might want to control them, people who are, you know, trying to play an angle. Uh, Eights are, the managers are on the lookout for like anybody who wants to hurt those they care about. And power dynamics. Like eight managers just see the world in terms of power dynamics and power games. Mm-hmm. Yeah, which I'm envious of. I wish I had more of that because on some level, everything's kind of a power game.
Yeah, it is. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and eights can just like hang in that tension so well and see it so clearly. Um, their firefighters would look like the low side of type 5. So can look like isolating themselves and brooding, just gathering information really intensely, being secretive about their activities. And minimizing their needs and taking poor like physical care of themselves.
This is interesting because if you have like a stereotype of what a date is, a lot of people are um what is it, hesitant to get to know eights because of their energy. They're dominating type of like bulldog type of energy sometimes. But like
Mm-hmm.
for me, I am drawn to that type of person because I want to like melt their armor and get to know them. Like everyone's squishy in
Mm-hmm.
the inside, right? But like
Mm-hmm.
if people have this stereotype again, you see nothing but the manager. Sometimes you'll, instead of seeing that their firefighter is active, you'll actually still think that it's the manager. And it's so like constant, I guess, a bias of not seeing how people are actually struggling, and that's so unfair. Like eights can struggle, but like they always have to like be strong for other people, you know, because of that. And so like
Yeah,
it just sucks to be like, yeah, they're actually struggling. They're trying to isolate and brood, but people are like, no, they're actually off standoffish, and I can't get to know them, so like I can't even get near them. So it's just like perpetuating this thing.
exactly. I'm so glad you pointed that out. Yeah, I'm so glad you pointed that out. Um, Another way that I've heard an eight talk about how when they're feeling triggered or activated, like their firefighters are coming out, they'll
Mhm.
just compartmentalize everything, especially like in relationships. They will put you into compartmentalizations and they will pick you apart like one by one by one
Oh
by one.
no.
And but that's a 5 dynamic of just like going super logical.
Yeah.
This is the data, and I'm going to like make you aware of the data. And so
Mm.
like actually, yeah, that can be seen as like an 8 being really domineering, but
Yeah.
that's actually a sign that their firefighter is out.
I
Their 5
know. It makes
firefighter.
me just want to hug them. I just want to hug all
Yeah.
the eights.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, especially because their biggest blind spot is their own vulnerable parts, which is their inner rejected type 2s, which is like the part whose impulses to be seen and to be loved were just not appreciated. And so like they mirror that dynamic within themselves, you
Mm.
know? Yeah. And so like bringing back into their awareness their own need to be loved and appreciated and their own vulnerability, and reintegrating that into their sense of self creates a healthy balance between attuning to the needs of others and protecting others, and
Yes.
then asserting their own needs.
Yes. That's lovely. I hope eights are hearing this because we love you guys. We know you're
Yeah,
softer. Like, it's just, I
yeah,
wish you didn't have to be so strong. Mm.
hmm
I have a good
yeah.
thought though. Like, are the managers and the vulnerable parts usually extreme opposites? Like, does it feel like that sometimes?
I mean that's what it seems like.
Yeah.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
like if you think of the manager parts, they're so on the periphery that the manager parts very often aren't aware of the vulnerable parts. They aren't even aware that they exist. And also, oh, there's one other thing I was gonna say about that. Um, oh man, I lost it. It'll come back. Oh, it was so good. It was so good.
Oh,
Um, I bet it'll come back. Oh, yes, here it is. Very often the manager parts blame the vulnerable parts for their problems. So like especially we see this a lot in like highly sensitive people. the manager parts that are trying to just hold everything together and fit in and get outer world needs met, blaming the sensitive, vulnerable parts for their problems. Like, if you weren't so sensitive,
Yeah.
then I'd be better at this job.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so like that's just another dynamic of like the opposites of those, like how they
Mm.
can clash inside.
I'm sure many people can resonate with that.
I can, yeah, that's a story that I have to catch my parts doing inside a lot. Like, no, we're not blaming our innocence. We're not blaming, like, these vulnerable children inside of us for our problems. Like, we're actually gonna change the way that we view them. And yeah, so I'm more oriented toward loving them than fitting in. Yeah. Okay, so that's eights. Lovely eights. Eights are my favorite, some of my favorite clients. Enneagram type 9s. So managers for 9s are daydreamers. They just have a knack for absolutely ignoring disturbing aspects of life, and they just seek peace and comfort. Managers for 9s they are on the lookout for how they can shift to make their relationships more pleasant, more harmonious, easier.
I can't with 9s. You hear me, 9s? I can't with you. Do something.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
please
sweet
stop.
9s. Yeah. Well, and I have a lot of compassion for 9s because their firefighters are type 6s.
No.
So yeah. So like, can you imagine the anxiety of a type 6, but in a firefighter role? Like, no wonder their managers are just like, we're shutting this down.
Laughing at
So like,
9s. Sorry.
yeah, the low side of type 6. So like frantic activity, like worrying about worst case scenarios, passive aggressive and defensive. They can get really paranoid and suspicious about other people, like some just angry outbursts. Like, yeah, type 6s are, in a manager role are very anxious, and like as a firefighter role can be even more anxious and just spinning. Yeah. And so the vulnerable part that needs integration for type 9s is their inner rejected type 3. So the part who felt that they had to give up their own goals for those of others to cope, to get their needs met, whatever the reason is. And so reintegrating this part brings in, it allows them to find a healthy balance between supporting others and then also pursuing their own goals, embodying their own self more. Yeah. Yeah, so that is my little spiel on integrating the Enneagram and parts work. Yeah, real quick, I'll just say I have a free Meet a Part of You worksheet. So if you're interested in actually like applying this to your own self and like your own inner world, highly recommend you download the free worksheet. It'll like, all you have to do to get started is just be able to identify a thought you're thinking or a feeling you're having or a body sensation you're having. And then like there's going to be a whole series of questions that's going to like let you have a whole conversation with that phenomenon inside of you.
Love
So
it.
that's available if you want to take this deeper and make it real.
And I do want to do the caveat for people who are deeply struggling through their trauma or things like that. I'm gonna give a caveat, maybe it might not be the right time to do that stuff, but like maybe as you work through your somatic things with a therapist or your own journey, then this might be the right time to take it. It's a
Yeah,
supplement. It's a great tool after
cool.
working through some
Yes.
stuff.
Yes, like trust
Yeah.
yourself. And the thing about this worksheet though is my main goal at the end of it is for you to have a realization that, oh, this isn't a bad part of me. This part is protecting me in this way. Like it might not be a helpful outcome, but like the intentions of this part is helpful. And so like the goal of this worksheet is to bring more love and awareness into your parts, because like we have no bad parts, manager parts, firefighter parts, especially vulnerable parts. Like they're only ever doing their very best to survive. And so parts work is not about making any of them wrong, but actually thanking them for the role that they had to play for you growing up, realizing their intentions are helpful, and being like, hey, I've got you now. I've got you now. Yeah.
Mm,
Hmm.
that's a wonderful message. Thank you.
Yeah. Is there anything else you want to say or talk about while I have the presentation up, or should I stop sharing my screen?
You can stop sharing. I'll
Okay,
link
cool.
that on in the
Yeah.
description. So, couple thoughts before I forget.
Hmm.
So, I love that it's similar but different. The system, and it can give people, I think, who are, more novelty seeking, people who are just kind of skeptical about these boxes in the first place. Like, you
Hmm.
guys, you're not the damn boxes, okay? So like just go through it. You'll figure it out. Like, so it's this surface level stereotype type of information that kind of goes across the internet. People do these surveys online, like, oh, I'm a this, and they start believing the stereotype and they don't go beyond that. And so like, no, I already did the personality work. I'm this type. It told me and I'm done. Like, you're not done. Archetype work is so deep and transformational that like I wish we could find as many ways as possible to describe whatever people need to do to get that shit done. Like it just, I just want to, like, especially with my nines, like I want to shake you. I want to grab you by the neck. I want to shake you to like move your potato ass. I'm just kidding. But like I'm part nine too, so I get it. It's just so it's just this
Hmm.
projection thing I have. So, anyways, like when you
Hmm.
talk about the manager, I was thinking about persona the whole time. So like
Hmm.
manager is, the one protecting and everything. And for me, I think about it also in terms of like what other people told you you had to be in order to receive love and care, right?
Yes.
So it's the
Yes.
the top layer of your iceberg. It's not actually you, until you get to the squishy middle insides that none of us really can really get to until, we go through certain deaths of the soul and then you kind of emerge and then you're a big old mess and you realize this is you, right? But like before that, all of us are kind of building on top of it. So it actually made me go think backwards too. When you're a child, it's so vulnerable and like, hold on, there's my baby. So it's like so vulnerable and tiny and squishy,
Aw.
right? It's soft. And then like something happens, more armor is built on top of you, life event happens, more ice from the iceberg keeps on building more and more and more. And so like it's important to acknowledge that this building of the ice armor around your young, vulnerable self is part of life. All of us have this, right? And so when you're learning to undo this, that's where the magic happens. But just because you see yourself a certain part of your life, it doesn't mean that's how you're always going to be. Events happen, you meet different people, you become, interpersonally, you start healing, you do work on your own. And so this is just like very dynamic things happening, just like the arrows. And so it just got me really excited because when you talk about like I talk about persona stuff, some people don't really resonate with that and it just doesn't click. So when you give the visuals and the descriptions, I think that will help so many more people who like the words and the language and the visuals and especially the concentric circles. That was really helpful too for people to be like, this makes more sense. I get this. Because inside the
Hmm.
iceberg is my baby self, and then outside is the protectors, the people trying to help me out, and that makes more sense for a lot of people than this abstract concept of what a freaking persona is or what your shadow is. And so I think you found a way to bridge two very complicated things, abstract, concrete, and then like make it in a way where people are challenged enough to kind of be in the middle, which is integration in the first place. So you did a good,
Yay!
I think you did a great job like blending a lot of things. So I just wanted to share that. If
Cool.
any of
Oh,
that made sense, because
thanks.
I just like blah all over you.
No, that totally makes sense. And I'm actually taking that as a huge compliment. Yeah, because like that's exactly what I hope to do. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, because like using the word persona and shadow, it's like, yeah, exactly. I think Jung even has a diagram of like the persona is kind of like
Hmm.
on the outside, right?
Yes,
Like, and
yes.
so it's like, yeah, we're talking about the same thing, just using different language.
Hmm.
And sometimes different languages are going to land differently with different
Yes.
people.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Thanks, Booney.
Yeah, so people
Yeah.
have a choice. Like, and that's the thing about like me learning too. I'll tend to, this is how I learn. I tend to kind of pick a term, whatever's in the psych or self-development community, and I'll just maybe take like, who are the top 10 people here? I'll read their stuff. I'll go watch the lectures, read the things that people comment on too, and I'll read about their interpretations of the stuff and see, okay, so they consume this. this is how they interpreted it, and this is what they recommend too, or this is the language that they're using that's not found in the video or the resource. And so if it's just the map starts getting bigger. And I think that's what people just need when you kind of explore and touch many things. It's like you're getting a buffet. You get to kind of pick and choose what you want, right? And like, oh, I like this. I'm go
Mhm.
back here, and like, I don't know if
Mhm.
I tried it well enough. I'm gonna go back and try it again. And so I think this is a good encouragement for people to just not be afraid of something, because like, oh, when I first explored the Enneagram, I left it for 3 years and I came back because I just didn't understand it. Because my reference point was Myers-Briggs. I was like, no, this doesn't make
Mhm.
sense to me because I'm just doing like the cognitive functions. That makes sense to me because moving
Mhm.
things around, like what is a cognitive function
Mhm.
then? But then some other people started pairing archetypes with Myers-Briggs, the cognitive functions, and like, okay. And then I went back to the Enneagram, like this makes more sense now. Like, so I think it's just give yourself permission to take your time and really just so when you use the cake, I did this like take it like how do you eat a cake like or one bite at a time, right? So like, don't eat the whole damn cake for like and consume it and think
Mhm.
you're done. Like enjoy it. It's flavorful, has little different layers. Just take a bite here, leave it, come back when you want. This cake will last forever. It's like a never ending
Mhm.
cake. So just really enjoy it. I think people feel
Mhm.
pressure like I want to grow and I'm going to consume everything now and I'm done. I am completely transformed and healed. I don't need any more. Like, well, um when I
Mhm.
turned 40, I need to go back and like do some more healing because like life just like hit me like a brick wall. Like this is not
Mhm.
nothing
Mhm.
happened. It's just the age made me change and I needed to go back and cry in the corner for a little bit. And so I think
Mhm.
that's a useful tool too. Just your perception of things will change over time. Like it's not a bad thing. It's just saying life does that to people. So I should share
Completely.
that.
And like I feel like it's a design flaw in the universe, but like I find every time I reach the next level of visibility or coming into my power or intimacy, becoming more
Mhm.
intimate and real and true, I have to go back and like re-resolve and have those same
Yeah.
conversations that I had with myself just at the next level. And so like I'm always like, oh, this again. Like I thought like I did
Yep.
legitimately like resolve this. And I did, but at that level.
Yes.
And so yeah, and so it's
Yes.
like that's why it's always so at the next level, I'm like, oh, okay, I've got to learn a new way to hold the conversation about this. I've got to learn a new language, a new like lens to look through.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's not
Hmm.
an insult too to say stuff like that. It's just like we're capable, like you said the word capacity a couple times, right? We have the capacity to see something and then all of a sudden you come back to it. It's like looking at a video of yourself when you're like 20 years ago or something. It's like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that that was my way of the world. That's how I interacted. That was the language that I use. Like it's so different from who I am now. Same thing's going to happen when you have like some, theme that's your thing. Like mine is rejection, right? Mine is like outcast stuff. So like when something does trigger it or happen, I give myself more space to not react. And that's just the goal, like it's not to completely say 100% cleared. Like I don't think that's impossible for most of us. I just think that you give yourself more compassion, just like, okay, it's happening again. I feel it coming. I'm gonna do what I need to do, but like I'm gonna be kind to myself, like I can do this,
Hmm.
you know?
Hmm. Yes. And it's like that's so classic like manager parts to think that the salvation is going to be in like being perfectly healed or like being
Yeah.
perfectly self-actualized when really the salvation is like learning to love yourself in the mess.
Mm, I love it. I love it.
Hmm.
I know that some people sometimes say that and it sounds kind of cheesy, but it's so true. I don't care if it's cheesy. Like that really is one of the most ultimate things to have as a
Like
life
life
process.
just keeps bringing me back to the cheesy cringe over and over again.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Exactly. Yeah, it's like because life is messy, and we so often we think that we can like self-actualize our way out of our humanity, but there's an
Hmm.
element of like being human that's always going to feel vulnerable.
Yeah. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
I love that. So affirming. Thank you.
Hmm. Yeah. Thanks, Booney. This has been really lovely. I'm feeling like alive in my body, yet really like peaceful at the same time.
Hmm. It's invigorating. It's also like there's good work being done in this world. So I'm very hopeful when I'm not
Hmm.
used to being hopeful as before because I'm doom and gloom. So it's nice.
Good. Yeah. I strive to be a hope merchant. Well, like the for type threes, I think it's like the virtue is holy hope.
Hmm.
So yeah, I find that for better or for worse, people start using that hope word around me. So I'm like, oh yay, cool, mission accomplished.
Love it. Oh, okay. I have a thought though. I have a thought
Yeah,
that
tell me.
because you talked about only one aspect of pairing Enneagram work with IFS. I
Yep.
want to remind people that this is only part of it. We're not trying to make you feel bad for the things that happen when you're in this stressed out version of your type. It's just a pattern that you're looking at to identify, right? Um,
Exactly.
so if you have a pattern, you kind of have a feeling, you have a expert coach here. I don't know how to, can I, this way that you can contact if you're interested in learning more.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Like I would like whatever happens, like I would love to even just be able to chat with you and point you in the direction of some helpful resources and stuff.
Yay.
So please, please, please reach out. And like, yeah, that's a good point because and also with IFS, they talk about parts where they also talk about self energy, essence energy, like love energy inside of you. And I've also been synthesizing that with the Enneagram
Mm.
holy virtues as well. So maybe we'll have to do another one.
Yeah, not maybe. It's gonna
Yeah.
happen.
Love it. Okay, thank you so much. It's nice to meet all of you. I hope you reach out. I hope to hear from some of you.
Yes, please reach out and we'll see you in the next video.